What does a typical day of retirement look like for me? Welcome back to the hustle and welcome back to the grind, everybody. And everybody talks about this as a hot topic, and a lot of people would love to really understand what makes a person tick in retirement. Now, first of all, the caveat being every day is a little bit different, and that's the point. It's not the hustle, it's not the grind where everything is basically Groundhog's Day. Get up, race to work, come home, make dinner, do your little tidbit for 2 hours and then go to bed and then keep repeating. We don't do that. I don't do that. And every day looks a little bit different. Some days, I don't want to start to kind of where I start with and kind of how my day progresses and where I sort of end up throughout the day. I know a lot of people are curious. What do I spend my days doing? And first of all, let's start by saying, I don't probably get quite as much rest as I probably should. Everybody says most people should have 7 to 8 hours of rest in a given sleep. I find myself quite often more like 5, 6 hours, sometimes 7 hours if I'm lucky. But usually it's my body telling me. I'm not setting any alarm clocks. But herein lies the first point. The first point is, I usually get up around when my wife, she gets up, she heads off to work. But I make a habit not to be that lazy bozo that's just laying around in bed. So when she gets up, I sort of, show good faith. And to me, I kind of do the same thing. So she gets up around and she's moving by 6:30 and then out the door by 7. And I make sure that come 7 o'clock, I'm slithering out of bed myself. So basically 7 o'clock is kind of where it all starts. And usually there I start watching a little bit of TV, maybe check out the weather forecast. Because here, in Edmonton and here in Canada, weather can change very, very quickly. But I basically start checking out the news, listen to a couple of news highlights. News can be a little depressing. That's why I don't focus too much on it. But I like to catch a couple of quick highlights. I usually hit that. Then I spend about 20 minutes doing that, catch the first round because the news keeps repeating itself on a cycle. Then usually by about 7:30, I'm starting to read up on some of the latest, I'll call it Google news, if you will. I go more international news. I'm browsing both a little bit for curiosity, whether it's browsing about the car market, browsing about, industries in all sorts and economy and all kinds of, you name it, just general banter, general news, but on more of a global level. And I just like to know, I believe being well read and learning something new every day is something that a lot of us, we don't really prioritize, but I believe that if you learned even one new thing today, that's a win. So I usually start out with some of that, and then I transition that into a little bit of research, and I kind of get into a little bit of ideas about, my retirement videos, and I start thinking about, topics that are hot to me, topics that are activating me or triggering me, topics that are meaningful to me and topics that are meaningful to you guys. And I know a lot of you viewers are very passionate about certain ideas, and the idea about retirement and lifestyle and friends and all of that are very passionate topics. They're triggered topics. So, to me, those things, I live by that stuff because that's all important to me, and living my best life is important. So I'm always kind of just browsing and researching, and I kind of finish that off by basically get up, have a quick shower, make that as fast as possible, jump up, get dressed, and grab some quick rags and get out the door. But usually along the way, somewhere in there, I'll grab a quick bite. I usually, I've been doing some of my, as I mentioned, a bit of a carnivore diet. I'll grab a little bit of a quick bite, usually a quick bite. Sometimes I'll even wait till closer to noon and then I'll have a quick bite, but it usually represents something more high in protein and certainly lower in fats and carbs. And I really don't do like breads and things like that in the morning. I usually do something more high in protein. So basically sail out the door. And at that point, we're talking, it's usually around, by that time, I try to be out the door by around 8 o'clock. So I do a lot within that, I guess you could say within that first hour. It's a very densely organized time frame. It's my way to sort of accelerate myself back into sort of the next day. It kickstarts, as it were. I've always lived by the idea that, I had uncles and, growing up in farm environment, that they believed that a lot of them do more work by coffee time than most people do all day. And I really try to live by that premise, because I also believe that By the afternoon, it's often too hot, especially if you're doing outdoor physical work. Yeah, outdoor work can be a little bit cumbersome, and it can be a little hot, and it can be a little much and a little bit less productive. So quite often, I'll just generally try to get out the door by 8 o'clock armed with some good information, heading off to do a little bit of video work, obviously some of the TikTok, but I also transition it and make it and incorporate it as part of more of the exercise regime. And so if I'm filming a video and say it's a 20-minute video, usually my walk around that time looks more like an hour and a half. So while you're catching a little highlight reel, I'm usually walking for a pretty good length of time, at least in the summer. Come winter, I shorten that up drastically. Come winter, all I'm trying to do is get out there, do a quick film, put a few steps in. If I'm able to manage in the winter time 5,000, 4,000 steps a day, I'm doing well, just because it's so cold. But in the summertime, I'm averaging 15,000 steps, sometimes 20,000. I've even had a couple days that were close to 25,000 steps in a day. So I try to get a lot of exercise in these walks, and then I'll, of course, head on down, grab a coffee, sniff around, see the odd person once in a while. I ran into my neighbor the other day. He happened to be in the lineup in front of me, and he actually, hey, Mark, I'll buy a coffee. So, sometimes there's a little bit of social atmosphere in there, and, sometimes along the way I'll run into somebody and just a bit of a chit chat. But really, that first part of the morning is the most productive. It's a densely populated part of the day with, content creation, walking, exercise, and of course I get my first meal. And I do all of that within probably the first couple hours. And then usually, I get back home after that hour and a half, 2 hour walk. Then I'm usually starting to get into other things. I start doing a little bit of edit. So I'm putting a couple of these videos together. So I do that, but usually there's a little multitasking in there, because sometimes I'll kind of break that up, and, some of my adult children are kicking around. Some of them, they're all in different schedules. Some work, some go to school. And so what I typically find is I always prioritize some time with them. And I always make sure that we head out and maybe we go grab a coffee, or I sit down and chat for 45 minutes, maybe go for a drive. Because I believe if we aren't doing this for the real reasons and the right reasons, then what is any of this retirement or living for? So I always make sure, whatever it is, family's always prioritized. Now, family's not always there. Sometimes they're out and they're off to work, and then the house is quiet, and then that's when I become extra productive in terms of, trying to get some video content done, maybe do a little research. But then what I've been doing is quite often making sure almost every single day I have something significant, sort of a reason to head out, a reason to, let's just call it my productivity day. Well, and my productivity day is almost every day. The idea is I try to focus on something that's moving the needle forward. And so what that means is, last night we went golfing. So me, my spouse, and a few of the kids and a boyfriend there, we all went golfing yesterday at late afternoon. And so part of that was getting prepped, in the afternoon. We got the golf clubs ready, loaded them into the truck. And then by the time they wrapped up work, I met them at the golf course. And so we spent the rest of the evening golfing and played 18 holes. It was a great evening with family. Other than mosquitoes were just chewing us alive, because it was kind of a lot of swampy. It was kind of a moist area, really humid. And it was really hot yesterday too. It was probably, I think it made up 34 degrees. So that's kind of another typical day. I usually try to cap off, late afternoon, evening with something big like that. As a matter of fact, today, again, I've got another appointment at the bank. So quite often what I'll find myself is the late afternoons, transitioning into evenings, I'm trying to plan something. Whether it's even a big bike ride, or whether it's going to visit some family and, maybe relatives in a hospital, or just going visiting, or just doing something that feels productive, something, not just floating around. So I make sure that there's always something. So today we're doing some banking. That's going to be a piece that we have to talk about with the banker, and some investment discussions, and, I have to kind of go down there and take care of some of that. So you always have to have your finger on the pulse of that. So usually, in the early morning, going back to the early morning, usually, like I said, by the time I'm done editing and having a chat with my my adult children, so to speak. Usually, we'll hang out, maybe go for a short drive, talk about life, talk about work on both sides, their work, and maybe I'll chat a little bit about, what's going on in my life. And it's a great way to bond. And quite often I kind of mix that up, and might be one of my kids one day and then different kids the other days. And everyone is a little bit of a different relationship. So some of the, whoa, there's like a swarm of wasps. I don't know if you saw that. I actually had a wasp flying around me and almost went into the coffee. Whew. Anyway, see, there's a reality and unplugged. Anyway, so I kind of end up spending some time with the kids, and sometimes we'll even go out for lunch. And now, one of my youngest, now he's got a new job, but he doesn't quite have his driver's license yet. So now I found myself driving him all over the place. So he's heading off. I've got to drive him, drop him off, pick him up. It's a 20-minute drive each way. So that's been consuming my time. So I spend, I'm kind of Mr. Mom, so to speak, in some ways. I spend a lot of time, chauffeuring him around, and he is a priority. He's one of my young ones, and I've said, we've got to make sure the kids are off to a right start. So I'm trying to give him all the benefits that he can get. I'm trying to give him all the advantages, getting him to work for now, and he's transitioning. He's working on getting his driver's license, but it's not there yet. Hockey, come wintertime. Hockey's another evening thing that quite often spends a lot of my time, taking my son to practice, to games, to do all of that stuff. That's kind of a typical evening in the winter. Once kind of things get cold, the vast majority of my evenings are consumed with doing a little bit of, whether it's read a book a little bit, maybe do a little research online. Even once in a while, I like to just knock the webs off and kind of dumb myself down and even watch a few videos. And sometimes I'll put a few big videos on the big screen in the house. Big screen, yeah, 48-inch. But, quite often that's just kind of what my evenings look like. My evenings are rarely filled with watching just mindless TV. I rarely do that. I usually feel like I need to be doing something a little bit more productive. Oh, look at that. That's a cool car right there. Lotus. Love that thing. That is absolutely great. So you can't go wrong with a little Lotus Exige or Esprit or whatever. Not Esprit, Lotus Exige or Elise. That one's the Elise, I believe. But yeah, so my evenings quite often are just built with, once my spouse gets home, usually evenings are built around, doing something productive. Again, golfing, or we're doing a little trip, maybe head out to the ranch and spend a little, a weekend out there. But the typical day, come noon, maybe go grab a lunch with the young ones. Then in the afternoon, I find myself often, getting to a place too where, maybe meeting up with a friend. I do have if you can believe it or not, I have a couple friends from way back in the day. And, we'll chat, we'll call or text once in a while. And it's some days, it's not your typical every day, but some days we'll just meet up, and it's usually around that. It's usually late morning through to the early afternoon, spend a couple hours chatting and doing that kind of goodness. And it's sometimes what I end up doing too. Another thing that I find myself personally as part of, my retirement looks to be like doing something that is actually, and I notice this word productive is feeling, whoa. Geez, the wasps are crazy, and we got wasps and mosquitoes. Usually it's like you get one or the other here. When there's a summer, it's hot and dry, you usually get the wasps. Then when it's cooler and wet, you get the mosquitoes. Now we seem to be getting it all right now. I don't know what's going on. It's just that right series of weather events here. Wow, that was another one. Make sure he's not in my coffee here. So my afternoons are fairly productive, because here's the thing. If I get through a day and it's a day that looks like just sitting around and relaxing, I just find I don't feel like I took care of it. And I get it. I'm a little bit on the younger side, and that probably has something to do with the fact that I'm retired. Oh, that's kind of sad. We got a bird down there. Bird down. Oh, it looks like I think it's a duck over there. Yikes, that's not good. But I guess that's human nature, I suppose. But see, probably had something to do with the fact that I'm 55. When I retired, I was like 53. A typical day does not really involve in a lot of lounging time, and I kind of recognize that as you age, there's probably going to be a bigger percentage of rest time and relaxation than productive time. But I'm still kind of coming out of that mode of all in, like head down, and you know how the rest goes. So coming from that corporate world, I mean, I'm 2 years out now, but I'm still like, if I'm not getting something accomplished, I don't feel like it's been a very good day. So usually the rest of the afternoon, after, I maybe meet up or hang out with the kids for a bit, then maybe you do a little more research, hang out with a buddy, go for coffee the odd time. There's other opportunities in there to do a little bit of home production. If I want to fix something up, I notice that baseboard is damaged. Okay, I might take care of that. There's something that's been kind of lingering for a while. Or this door needs an adjustment, so I might go do that. Or, oh, that car is due for an oil change. You know what, let's just go take care of that. So that's what kind of usually my afternoons look like. And to be honest with you, the last year and a half, my typical days have also filled in there in different time slots throughout the day of taking care of banking, administrative stuff for the estate for my parents, of course, all of that, and dealing with all of that work, cleaning their house, setting it the stage, of course, getting it ready for sale. And that's been a big part of the last 2 years. As a matter of fact, I'm still waiting for some of the final paperwork to come in. But we're basically done. Like, the house is sold, which I kind of mentioned there a while back. It was kind of sad. I did a final walkthrough and I did a video on that. I can share that at the end if you're kind of curious. I'll share the link at the end of, my final walkthrough of our family home. I grew up in there. I wasn't born there. I was born in Saskatoon, but then we moved to the city here, and I ended up, we moved there when I was like 4 years old, 3.5, 4. And that's basically where we lived. That's where I lived my entire life up until I got married and moved out. And so that was a big moment for me walking through there. There's crap loads of memories. So that, dealing with all of that, the cleaning of the house, going through keepsakes, giving stuff away, selling stuff, touching it up, cleaning, just because I did a lot of it myself. A lot of people just like hire contractors, come in and do a major. I did it myself. It was just something. I had my son with me. Honestly, my son is the best. He was a little soldier. And so, every Thursday he'd get off a little early from school. I'd go grab him. We'd head down there. We'd spend, typically on Thursdays, we'd go down there and we'd do some major cleanup and trips to the dump or trips to the giveaway, maybe Salvation Army or Value Village or places like that. And we would drop some stuff off. And that was a big part of my last, probably, maybe not so much in this summer, but up till like Christmas anyhow, was absolutely flat out with cleaning, purging, selling, paperwork, credit cards, debt, lawyers, accountants, bankers. That was literally, I could fill days and days and days with a lot of those things that I was doing for the first probably year and a half out of retirement. So a lot of my days were spotting in those types of activities. We're doing a lot of banking business, meetings, trying to organize logistics, selling the house, meeting up with, kind of the realtor and lawyers and dealing with all of that. It's very, very, anybody who knows that they've been, a lot of you have been executors to estates. You know what that means. And when there's debt owing and when there's assets and when there's all these other things, there's a lot to deal with. And so a lot of people deal with it and you move on. But that's just kind of where things were. And so that was a big part of a lot of my days. Honestly, for the first, I would say, probably, again, first year to year and a half of more or less taking care of all of that. Now we've sort of popped out at the other end and we're just waiting for some final documentation. But the reality now is the next phase. The next phase is continuing my own journey personally. So every day has to look like it has some level of physical activity. So whether it's first thing my walk, whether it's if I didn't get my walk in the morning because of some meeting or something, then I make sure I do a short walk in the afternoon. So that slots in there sometimes. And, quite often, somewhere in the middle there, I'll grab something to eat, usually make a bowl of, chili or a stew or something, have something like that. And, and kind of keep moving. And I don't spend a lot of time on those types of activities, but basically my afternoon is usually very busy, being as productive as possible. So again, followed by, then everybody starts coming home from work. My spouse, some of the, the younger ones, they all start rolling in. And then we start reprioritizing. Sometimes we go out to sporting events. Maybe there's a show in town. There's always something that we make sure that we've got focus and our finger on that pulse, because, having lazy days of not having anything to do, those are wonderful days, but we really don't do much of that. Actually, if there's any of that, we try to focus during our travels. So, doing what we did this summer, we went to Hawaii, as a lot of you probably already know. So that's when we really pick the R&R. Now that said, we still walk around and sight tour and do all those things, but I'm also okay sitting at the pool. I'm also okay sitting on the beach for 3 hours. Those are always fun things to do, just to relax and not do a whole lot. So that's where I really kick into my R&R. And I don't do a lot of just lounging around time. That's not really as much kind of my take. I'm more go, go, go. And a lot of it's been rubbed off. I have relatives like that have, own businesses, multiple rental properties, multiple properties for their own personal use, lakefront properties. And some of those relatives were close to us, and I see how they live. I see their lifestyle, and I see that go-go attitude, and not from a level of just being busy, but when you look deeper, it's really about, success is driven because, or as a result of those efforts. But those efforts are more than just driving because of looking for money and the ultimate end goal. It's really just the focus is being productive, moving the needle forwards, doing something that's meaningful. Planting a garden, cutting the grass doesn't make money, but it's being productive. And that's how they live their lives. And it's really rubbed off on me in a big way, is just being productive, feeling I'm adding some value, and in some way I made my life better and even my family's life better somewhere along the way. And so that's just kind of how I see life. And that's my day-to-day. Your typical day in my life usually represents some social media in there, and of course living a lot of life, doing administrative stuff, pretty classic stuff, probably what a lot of people are doing, but that's just how I'm living my life. And every day is full. There's not a lot of lounging. There's a lot of go time yet. And granted, I'm 55, so I hope to keep doing this as long as physically possible. Maybe we'll do another golf game here this week. I don't know. We did one last night. Maybe head off to another one coming up soon. Maybe even driving range tonight. Like I said, we got that appointment, of course, with the banker. But we're likely going to maybe do something after that, because that should be done by 5:36. Probably go grab a dinner, and that's often what we do. Quite often we have a bit of a later dinner, and we'll do it, as a family. And often we'll either have a barbecue possibly, or just head out, maybe grab a bite, when the weather's nice like this, we'll quite often sit out on the patio and enjoy conversation about life and each other and priorities. And we do feel like family is a big part of our life. Not everybody agrees on every topic, but we do all agree that family's the most important thing. So anyhow, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this, and what do you think about my day-to-day? Does it surprise you? Does it shock you? As well, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like and share, and we'll hope to see each and every one of you real soon, everybody. Catch you then. Have a lovely, lovely day. Bye-bye.